Good morning and welcome to Dublin City FM. You're listening to Council Matters. I'm Mick Fitz, and today we're going to look at the nexus between crime and politics. Is it there? Is it all in the fetid imaginations of tabloid editors? Or is it a reality that we should be far more concerned about than, say, ISIS or Al-Qaeda or all of those other guys that are also making headlines? To help me discuss this, I'm joined in the studio by a well-respected figure on the north side of Dublin and a man who's extremely well qualified to talk about this, Malachy Steenson. Malachy, welcome back again.
Good morning, Mick.
Yes. Malachy, to a certain degree, you and I, we started discussing this based on the fact that there was a raid, an official raid was launched on an ex-councillor's premises, his home. Now, we won't mention names because everybody is innocent. Nobody has been charged in this. But it struck me that, first of all, it's unusual for a politician's home, although in this case the person in question is a retired politician. But it's very, very unusual for such a thing to happen. What was your take on it?
Well, I think you're right. Firstly, that it is very unusual that politicians' homes are raided, particularly in such a public manner where you have, in that particular case, armed Gardaí from CAB and from the drugs unit raiding the place. But I think as we progress in society, and as we've progressed in this country since the establishment of the state, in fact, it's a logical progression. Drug dealers, and I'm not for one moment implying that the individual involved is involved in anything, because obviously no charges have been made. But it's entirely logical that those who are involved in criminality, particularly in the drug dealing networks, who run multi-billion-pound industries, would see political office as the next logical step. And there's no doubt in my mind, and I'm on the record as saying this probably 10, 15 years ago, that at some stage we would see people within the councils, and indeed within the Dáil, who have links to drug gangs. It's effectively a second country that's running. And it's a second state where normal rules don't apply, where they shoot people at will effectively, where they impose their own debt collection, for instance, on people, where they trade away in narcotics with immunity.
Is it a state within a state?
I think it clearly is. I mean, they operate through a myriad of front companies and public houses, for instance, and as we see,
cash businesses,
and not solely cash businesses. The cash businesses are used primarily to clean money and to launder money, but it feeds its way into legitimate businesses. And I think what we have in this state now, since Veronica Guerin was killed, and remember, the only reason the state reacted to that is because she was one of them, not because she was one of us. We had the establishment of the CAB, and the CAB is the biggest money laundering operation in the world, where they turn drug dealers' money into clean money for a percentage.
Yeah, I'll come back to that one because that's another one of mine. I want to take you just up on this one now, Malachy, and I look on this as on a societal level. You talk about drug dealers. Now, if I want to buy drugs, this program finishes in half an hour, I can guarantee you I will be able to go out and I will be able to buy drugs in the middle of Dublin, and I guarantee you this, by midday. But the drug is probably not an illegal drug, it's a legal drug, and that's tobacco. We know where to go. You and I know where to go. The police know where to go. Every couple of times a year I'll even see the customs making a bit of a song and dance down there. Isn't that the first thing we need to do? Say drugs are drugs, and whether they're legal or illegal, organised crime is involved. And isn't that the first?
Well, look at why organised crime is involved in tobacco. Now, there's no doubt today we would ban tobacco. We would probably ban alcohol as well.
Yeah.
But the state, and this is one of the arguments against taking drugs, narcotics away from criminal gangs, in a sense, and legalising them. Ultimately what you have is what you have with cigarettes. The government sees it as a tax take, and then they see it as a health problem, and they justify increasing tax on a product in order to create better health for its people. that shifts it into the hands of the very same gangs who sell drugs.
Yeah.
And now we have more tobacco sold on the streets by the same gangs than we do sold in tobacconists or shops. And what we also have then is the huge amount of pharmaceutical drugs which are sold. I mean, last week, for instance, in Rutland Street, there was up to 100 people queuing to buy tablets from whichever local drug dealer was supposed to arrive at the appointed time. Now that's staggering. A stone's throw from the very centre of Dublin. Yeah. A stone's throw from Store Street, an area which we're told is one of the most heavily policed in the country, where it has a huge amount of overt and covert police operations, which, from what I can see, are only directed towards political activists, in fact. And we saw, for instance, on Monday, up to 100 guards outside of Glasnevin Cemetery for a token protest. Yet, on the same day, a fellow drove into a football pitch in Clondalkin, I think, and shot 3 people. Yeah. And nothing about it. And what we have is, and you know, when this state was set up, we're told Garda Síochána, guardians of the peace, policing by consent. You walk around this area, there's no policing by consent anymore. No. You have a heavily militarised and a paramilitary police force, similar to what we had in the north of Ireland, or what we still have in the north of Ireland, with the RUC.
Yeah. Can I do a little bit of reeling in the years here? You were probably, you might have even just been a law student when it was all going down, Malachy, and I'm talking about the case of one Robert Trimboli. Do you remember Robert Trimboli? He was an organised crime figure in Australia who came over here, and I think he called himself Michael something or other, and he eventually they dropped the charges against him and he escaped to Spain, who had no extradition with Australia. Now, Robert was a very big organised crime figure. He was the Ndrangheta in Australia. He was very, very big. He was a heroin dealer. There's no getting away from that. But he made a very, very interesting statement once in a dramatised documentary, and he said, when the drugs are illegal, we blame the user. Oh, no, we blame the drug. But when the drug's illegal, we blame the user. In other words, alcohol's okay. But if you've got an alcohol problem, that's you. That's not Jemison. That's not Johnny Walker. But if you've got a heroin problem, that's heroin. And in many respects, haven't we, before we can even deal with the structure and the legal problems, don't we really have to get round this societal view of illegal and distinguishing between nice drugs and not nice drugs?
Well, I think that there's some merit in that, but I think certainly for a period of time people did look on it that way. But I think we've moved beyond that, and certainly in my thinking there was a period where you looked on, say, a drug addict as being some kind of a victim or somebody who just got caught up in this. Now the biggest reason and the biggest fault for those who are in addiction is greed. Yeah. And it's their total refusal to involve themselves in any kind of structured society, and that they just wanted to live the party lifestyle. And we see now where that gets you, actually. Only on this weekend, where we see a new celebrity being created by RTE. Yeah.
Be interesting to see whether they paid for that interview.
Well, I mean, it's clear that they paid somebody money to do it, and there was expenses paid. But it beggars belief that the state broadcast, well, I suppose it doesn't beggar belief because it is the state broadcaster and it's there to push the state's agenda. What we had, and what it said to me, and a young woman only said to me yesterday after watching that, she says, I'm off to Ibiza. Now, she was joking. Yeah. Do 2 years in Peru and come out looking like that? Yeah. You know, and this morning on TV3, for instance, on their programme, you had on, and his name escapes me, the guy from Finglas, who done a couple of years in Peru or somewhere for the same thing. Yeah. So we're creating another celebrity. Yeah. And there's no doubt, I mean, Paddy Power has odds of 7-1 that she'll be on Celebrity Big Brother. Yeah. What she's saying to young women out there, and young men, is, look, it's worth the risk. Mm-hmm. You'll only do 2 years, and you'll come out with a career. Yep. Yeah. It beggars belief. But let's look at what the state's real control over drugs and that is. And there's no doubt that the allowing of drugs into particularly working class communities. I mean, the harder drugs, heroin and cocaine and crystal meths and all of these new manufactured drugs that are coming along, is about controlling communities. It's about saying to working class communities, don't be bothering about the wider picture because you've got to look after your addicted friends or relatives. And that's where families' focuses become fixed. It's about looking after the, I was going to say victim, but I wouldn't call them victim anymore.
Can I then put it to you, Malachy, are you suggesting that if you live in Dalkey or Howth or, or Sutton where you've got a lot of money, you've got a pretty good income, you let's be blunt about it, you could be a doctor, a lawyer, you could be a dentist, usually a stockbroker, I find, shouldn't they be allowed to do cocaine,
Well, I mean, they are.
Well, we are. Well, that's the reality. That's what I'm saying. I mean, I use those professions because that's what I know. I mean, and I will say on record, cocaine was never my drug. I'm not interested in it. But I know from the places I go.
Jerry Ryan, for instance.
Yes.
RTE is awash with it.
Yeah.
And for people to come on who worked with him and to say when it came out that he had died from a heart attack related to his drug use and the amount of money that he was spending on it, that they would come out and say that they were surprised when the dogs in the street knew.
Yeah.
If I knew, how did somebody who's sitting beside him every day socialising with him not know?
RTE News.
What happens, again, it's part of the state's whole structure where people like him can lecture the rest of us. And he's not on his own out there.
No. Well, I make the point of saying that the last time I saw Jerry Ryan alive was out on the Clontarf Road in 2010, where he was protesting about a head shop. And I thought to myself, you hypocrite. You absolute hypocrite. And 2 months later he was dead.
And that's correct. And I was on a live line a number of weeks ago with Joe Duffy. And it was a general talk about crime, and I had said that communities where where the state doesn't protect communities, that people should have a moral responsibility to take control of their own areas and deal with these issues. And he was horrified at that. And Joe Duffy was one of the people who took community action to target that very same head shop. And, horrified, the state is horrified and totally afraid that people will actually start dealing with these issues themselves and deal with many other issues. And we have a state now here, and this goes back to its very creation in 1922. It's a state that has no legitimacy and is striving for that legitimacy. This is why they need to put 100 guards on the streets for a token protest. This is why they have to militarise the police. This is why they have to send carloads of police to arrest a young lad and then charge him with falsely imprisoning Joan Burton. We see the huge resources that are put into tackling any kind of political dissent, and particularly this government. It's somewhat slightly better under Fianna Fáil. Well, let's say it's managed better, and the overt policing doesn't seem to be as common. They do the same things, but they're not as blatant about it. But the blue shirts, and we go back to the Cosgrave government, the Law and Order government in the 70s, when Cooney was Minister for Justice. But remember all of the repressive legislation, the Offence Against the State Act, the creation of the Special Criminal Court, the executions of people in prisons. It's Fianna Fáil.
I want to come back to you then, Malachy, because we started off by saying this is about the nexus between politics and crime. The raid on that ex-councillor, that took place during an election campaign. Is it possible that the police somehow or other were lent upon to do a raid on a controversial person who was previously a council member for a controversial party? Could that have been coincidence, or are our police force that squeaky clean?
Well, I think certainly there is political interference in the police, and you can see very clearly that there is political direction. Despite what they say, right? But I think, to correct you there, I think that raid happened after the election.
Did it?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think that series of raids happened clearly as a result of what happened in the Regency. But this is not news. You know, that individuals, and I'll just stay away from in case he sues us, the person involved, but in a general sense, that these gangs can operate and drive hundreds of thousands of pounds cars with no apparent income, where we have the state, when they came back for the funeral of Bourne, the state sends its armed police force out to act as bodyguards for international drug traffickers. You know, and this is not Colombia, you know, where you have a society which does that and then tells us, well, that old woman that's getting beaten up down the road, or that's afraid to go to bed at night because somebody might kick the door in, or a farmer, or some old bachelor man living halfway up a mountain. We can't provide resources to protect those, but we can send teams of cops out to protect international drug lords and drive them effectively, escort them around the city. You know, it's that type of society. It's certainly not the type of society that those who went out 100 years ago this month sought to create. And it's certainly not the type of society that I think that most people want to live in. And when we look at, you know, the overlap, you see, what is crime, right? Now, it's a crime to go into Dunn's and rob a loaf of bread to feed your child.
Yes.
And you will be arrested and charged, and you'll be dragged through the whole. No expense will be spared to ensure that you pay the price for that, whether it ends up that you're in jail or some kind of a sentence in any event. Yet, what we see, for instance, being revealed even now through the whole Panama thing, will not be a crime, because those who make the laws ensure that their activities are not criminal, in the same way as the whole banking collapse wasn't illegal, because the laws are written to protect the wealthy and those in the establishment. And ordinary people, what we need to have, you see, and ordinary people know at the bottom of their heart that what happened, for instance, in the banking collapse, what happened in Ansbach, or what has happened in all of the tribunals, is wrong and should be a crime and should be punishable. But what we have is two states here. You know, we've already discussed, we have the crime state running, and we have in fact a third state where if these people get unwanted publicity, let's say, and people are hopping up and down because of the banking collapse or other things, or the planning tribunals, what we do is we don't say, right, lift them, DPP, up to the CCJ and try them. We say, actually, we'd set up a tribunal. Sure, and we'll drag it out for 10 years. And sure, it'll cost 100 million. But we get the truth. And in fact, we end up further from the truth. And there's so many qualifications put in because people's reputations have to be protected. And we end up with, people end up just getting sick of it. And nobody pays the price, and they just carry on, and then they're on to the next tribunal. But the same names crop up time and again in all of these things.
I want to put something to you, Malachy, because when I lived in Sydney, they used to say that watching organised crime was the most popular spectator sport because it's actually good reporting and it's good coverage. You know, it's not the Penguin took out a contract on the Monk in the Blue Boar with the with the Viper. You know, it's not. It's real people, real names, and all of that sort of thing. But what struck me, and we go back to the nexus between crime and politics, and that is that before I came back here, and just around the time I came back to Ireland from Australia, there was a famous case, or an infamous case, depending on how well you look at it. A major businessman was found with what we would call, in most instances, a trafficable amount of cocaine. Very major, you know, 35 grams is by most standards, in some parts of the world, it could get you killed if you're found guilty. This man was found guilty. Not that long after that, or thereabouts, he fronts up to an ex-Prime Minister, or maybe a current Prime Minister, gives him a, whatever it is, 1 million in a cheque, and the man says, thank you, big fella. in any other context, that would be seen as a drug user paying off a politician. But everybody said, all we looked at was the phenomenon. Does that tell us a great deal about the Irish character, about and how we're a very forgiving people, or are we a very naive people?
I think we're very naive and stupid. Yeah. We're sheep, basically.
Yeah.
But the matter that you're talking about, remember how that came out? Leaving aside the actual drug thing.
I wasn't in the country at the time, so you're going to have to explain it to me.
And this happened in Florida when he tried to fly off a balcony, a very well respected at the time businessman.
Yeah.
But because he apologised, then he was grand. And he done Liveline, and he done every other Late Show, and all of these programmes. And I'm sure Michaela will probably be on the Late Show this week or next week.
She's still in Peru.
Whenever she comes back. But the whole thing, and this is one of the matters that led to a tribunal. And I think it was 120,000 was in one of the cheques that he handed over to help out the now we can name the deceased Taoiseach, it was Haughey, obviously.
Yeah.
That only came out because of the falling out in the Dunn family.
Yeah.
Not because of the drugs, but because of they wanted to break open the trust, and because Dunn Senior had left all of these the business, the Dunn Stores Empire, in a trust that they couldn't break. Yeah. And there was legislation being brought before the Dáil by Haughey to amend trust law, which would have benefited the Dunns. And that's what people believe the money was for. Yeah. Now,
there was also a lot of tax benefits along the way to various people, and tax claims written off and so on and so forth.
And you see, when somebody, at a very basic level, Irish people are themselves corrupt.
Okay.
Right? And it can be as simple as going to your local councillor to get a medical card. Or going and looking for a house. You want a house. You want them to put you above somebody else, regardless of whether you're.
That's the way it used to be.
And that's corruption at the very basic level, right? So then it shouldn't be a surprise that, as you move up the establishment ladder, that just the figures get bigger.
Yeah.
And people think that it's okay to work and draw the dole. And, everybody has something to hide, so therefore nobody exposes
They're all in on it, in other words.
At different levels.
Yeah, okay.
And then we create this whole NGO and this culture of community projects, which are designed to employ a middle management level of people who would normally, in any other society, would be the activists and would be the people who would be trying to bring about real change in society. But as fulfilling what Thatcher set out to do during the miners' strike, when she was asked by one of our underlings that when all these miners are unemployed, we'll have to employ more people in the labour exchanges and that to look after them. And she said, no. Tell the unions to set up unemployment network things. We'll fund it. And they can all go there to one guy. And then he'll go to our guy with 100 files. And she was asked, well, why would we do that? She says, bring them into the net. Yeah. And all we have to do is threaten to stop the funding. Yeah. And they do as they're told. Yeah. And that's exactly what happens in communities right around this country.
Mm-hmm. I want to come back to you on the white collar one now, because this is for, at the end of the day, whoever's involved in the Regency and whatever these boys are doing in Spain, I'm going to be perfectly honest, it's chicken feed compared to what was going on at Anglo and so on and so forth. Put it to you this way, Malachy, are we being sold a pup in terms of blue collar crime? Now, what to me distinguishes blue collar crime from white collar crime is often violence, and the amounts are frequently a lot smaller. We're not talking about Colombia here. Do we basically not even see white collar crime as a crime? It's basically an accounting exercise, or it's a legal device, or it's, for want of that great Irish term, Q tours.
I think we do, and one of the things that, for instance, people will tell you about white collar crime, sure, nobody was hurt.
That's not true.
And can anybody say that what happened through the whole banking crisis didn't hurt anybody?
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
my point. That's my very point. Yes.
somebody mightn't get a bullet in the head,
Yeah.
but there are other consequences. And, you know, the tax take in this state, since its creation, has not got the same level of support and the same level of money going into it from these people. Yeah. All of this is done to deprive the state of tax, to keep money within this small section of society. And that is not a victimless crime.
Yeah. I want to go back to you there, Malachy, because we're about to run out of time, and it's what we were mentioning before we came on the air. This country, in effect, we were one of the originals for organised crime. I mean, you go anywhere around the world, you go Australia, you go New York, you go Canada, the Irish are always prominent in organised crime. One of the first, if you like, major institutions to be established in this country, and it was established by an Act of Parliament, was the Irish Hospital Sweepstakes, one of the greatest organised crime rackets of all time, and one of the greatest cons of all time. You would have been around when we had the nurses and the blind boys and all of that sort of, and Terry Rogers buying the tickets. Isn't that really what we're talking about here? Is that we have a state that, in essence, was really a rogue state.
Yes. I mean, well, this state, as I've said previously, was created out of the defeat of the Republic, so all of these things will be a logical progression. But if you have, and it was the Irish Hospital Sweepstakes, so we were funding the hospitals by smuggling tickets to America and getting people to buy them. And what we had there was McGrath and people who were creaming off the top. The very same grouping, or the very same personnel who have been involved in every scandal that we have had in this country, and we can go back, we can have the offshore accounts, we have all, you know, things that people now forget, planning, Ansbacher, you know, there have been so many, and you know, when again you go back to the banking crisis, AIB had to be bailed out when they bought ICC 20, 30 years ago by the taxpayer. And yet we allowed them to go and do the same thing again. But the same people and the same names now crop up with Panama that crop up in every other scandal. Yeah. And next year it'll be the Caymans or somewhere else.
Malachy Steenson, we could continue on for most of the afternoon and we would barely scrape the surface, but maybe we'll come back to this subject because there's a lot there.